So I'm here talking with Melissa Wong from University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana, who teaches library science. And Melissa had put up a tweet that got picked up by a lot of people on compassionate teaching. It got picked up by the Chronicle. Becky Supiano, who writes for the Chronicle teaching newsletter, featured this and put it up on the Chronicle. And I just wanted to talk to Melissa a little bit about this notion of compassion in teaching always, but also in particular in this time with all of the things going on. So Melissa, could you tell us a little bit about why you sent out the tweet and what sorts of things happened after?
This was a late night Sunday tweet. I had a student email me that she was sick with what she assumed was COVID-19. No testing available, but she had all of the symptoms. And she was deeply apologetic because she was going to miss a deadline for an assignment. Really, it was a draft assignment for feedback.
Mm-hmm.
Deeply apologetic. And said, well, maybe I should just take an incomplete in the course. And I said, well, we have 6 more weeks of the course left, so it's way too early to think about an incomplete.
Mm-hmm.
But also, you don't need to apologize. Like, I'm not worried about you turning in this assignment. Focus on getting healthy. It's going to be a couple weeks, and then we can chat about getting you caught up in the course. And this happened in the morning that she emailed me, and I emailed her back. And then I was thinking about her all day because I had known that some of my students would get sick and have family members who got sick, right? But she was the first one. And so I ended up thinking about it a lot that day, and also had seen stories and heard stories from students about faculty who were not very flexible at this time, or who were expecting students to maintain the same level of workload as they moved to remote teaching, or really weren't understanding of students who were having some personal challenges, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I just ended up, I think, turning that into this late night Sunday tweet saying, okay, fellow instructors, we're going to have students who get sick. And so here's your script for when it happens to you. You tell this, and that was the tweet, right? You
Mm-hmm.
say to the student, don't worry about the deadlines. I don't care about the deadlines in the course. Focus on getting healthy. We'll figure out the course stuff when you're better. And then I said, and then you also ask your student, do you have an adult living with you who can help take care of you? Do you have enough food and other essential supplies? And now that you're sick, your adult partner, if you have one, isn't going to be able to leave the house either. Do you have a way to get more food and essential supplies? Basically, are you going to be okay?
Mm-hmm.
And then I said, that's it. That's the reply you send to your student. Honestly, I thought that a few of my students who follow me on Twitter would give it a like, and a few of my instructor friends that follow me on Twitter would give it a like. I was not prepared for how much that tweet resonated with people.
Well, I think what's interesting about it is the message that you're sending is one that I think a lot of faculty feel, but are not sure about sharing that because there's this sense of faculty wanting to feel like they are still maintaining proper academic rigor, and there's this sense that faculty ought to be sort of making sure students are not going too easy during this time and they're able to focus on their work. If a student gets sick, a student gets sick, and you need to be aware that that sickness is going to transcend the traditional trajectory of a course. And
Yes.
and if the student is home and let's say it's not them who gets sick, but they have someone with them who gets sick, there are going to be things we need to consider. And there's this level of, and I use this word with my faculty all the time, level of humanity that we need to continuously consider about our students and recognize that their lives and their situations are not things we are always privy to. And we need to recognize them as adults and as responsible adults who are trying to take charge of their education, but sometimes run up against things that are immovable. And we need to be flexible about that.
Yeah.
So I think that's great.
Yeah, I think what also happens is it is a really uncertain time for faculty, right? There's a lot of stress for us in our personal life, as well as a lot of changes happening at work.
Yeah.
And sometimes we respond to that by saying, okay, I'm going to try to continue doing the best job I can as a faculty member. I'm going to keep delivering the course content that I promised my students. And that sense of dedication to our craft leads us to try to keep everything continuing on as if it's normal. And I think too, one reason why that tweet resonated with a lot of instructors was it gave people permission to say, okay, this isn't normal. and it's okay to make changes. Um, and my students and my colleagues aren't going to be upset with me
Mhm.
if I make those changes, right? Maybe good teaching isn't just keep trying to pretend that we can all do everything we were before. So it comes from this good place.
I think what you said is it's so important to consider too, and that I think that if you're a faculty member who teaches traditionally face to face,
Mhm.
there are things that you adapt to your course and change on the fly
Mhm.
during the semester because of circumstances that come up.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I've been talking to faculty about a lot is that we didn't go from face to face to online in the traditional sense. What we did was went from face to face to remote teaching, which
Mhm.
I believe is sort of a different kind of thing,
Oh yeah.
in that we haven't done a fully online course that was designed before and put
Mhm.
together in a particular way. We're trying to deliver content. And so what I love your point. You need to be able to be flexible and adaptable to the evolving situation, the same way you would be in a traditional course that's face to face. You just now
Mhm.
have to be that in a remote environment,
Mhm.
understanding that the circumstances that are surrounding it are going to be different.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that that's really terrific. Now let me ask you: did your students respond to you too when they saw that?
Yes. So I should say that I teach online.
Yeah,
And so my students have been online from the beginning,
yeah,
which means I also knew that they had the technology that they needed. They had some experience with online learning. It wasn't, from that standpoint, it wasn't such an adjustment for them.
mhm,
But at the same time, my students were going through enormous changes.
yeah,
Many of them, some of my students, because they're graduate students, were living on campus in apartments and they could stay in those apartments.
mhm,
Some of them were living in residence halls and had to move. Some of them are already distance learners and are living at home.
mhm,
But of course, like all of us, they're suddenly self-isolating, which is a huge change.
mhm,
They many of my students are returning adult learners who have children, so a lot of them are suddenly homeschooling.
mhm,
That's been challenging. And like
mhm,
all of us, everything is harder, right? Going to the grocery store takes twice as long because you have to don your mask and your protective gear and you go wait in line and wash your groceries when you get home, right? So even though in some ways people felt like, oh, but your courses are continuing, it's business as usual, I was like, not at all for my students. So I had already talked to my students about I already have flexible deadline policies in my course, but that's doubly so now,
mhm.
right? With all these changes. Anytime you need an extension, just let me know. We'll talk about that. I'm always happy to flex. And then I also had worked with my students to modify some of the workload in the course.
Mhm.
So in a couple cases, I just made changes in assignments and said, you know what? We're still going to meet the learning goals
Mhm.
based on the outcomes and what the assignment was supposed to be doing, but I'm going to make a few little modifications because I know you're having trouble concentrating. My students would email me and say, I can't even make it through 3 pages of an article
Uh-huh.
because my concentration is so blown.
Yep.
So I had already made some changes. And then in a couple of cases, I worked with my students to say, I have ideas. I'm open to your ideas. Let's talk about what we think would be helpful. What would you like to do? What is challenging? And they were really good about looking at the course outcomes and making suggestions. So interestingly, I think for my students, my tweet was just, oh, that's Melissa doing what Melissa does.
Mhm.
But I will say that between things like flexible deadlines and just reminding them of that, and I have check-ins with my students. We meet synchronously once a week already.
Mhm.
I start every week with a little check-in and say, can I connect you to resources? How are we doing? And then assignment modifications. They do keep saying, thank you so much. It's just knowing that you understand and that I can talk to you makes me feel so much better.
Yeah. Well, I think that makes you hit on some great points right there. And one of them is about modification of assignments, but
Mhm.
never losing sight of your learning objectives and recognizing that you're meeting your learning objectives. It's just differently than you might have met them
Mhm.
before. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, you're staying true to your academic, and that's the message I really want to make sure we get out there, is that modifying your learning objectives and modifying your assignments at this time does not mean you're changing what you want your outcomes to be. What you're doing is you're adapting to the current situation to make it as effective as possible
Yeah.
for your students. And what you said about your students' attention and all of that, I mean, I communicate a lot with my students. I shoot
Mhm.
videos every week and send them to them, and then we do synchronous meetings. I do 2 a week. They can drop into either of those two to
Mhm.
talk to me. We do every other week, we do a 15-minute check-in. I only have 12 students this semester, so it's easy for me to do that,
Yeah.
just to make sure everybody's okay. And they appreciate that. They appreciate the flexibility. I've moved a few things around in my course to try to make it more manageable. And the students have just appreciated all of it, the flexible deadlines. And I put deadlines in there. I tell my students, the deadlines are there because a lot of students need deadlines to work towards.
Yeah.
But if you can't make the deadline, that's fine. Just let me know and we can move it.
They're kind of arbitrary anyway.
Yeah,
Aside from the end of the semester, which I don't have control over, the registrar does,
yeah,
I look at my course and think a lot of it is somewhat arbitrary that I decided to set in place in December when I did the syllabus.
right.
Why are we turning this assignment in on April 30th instead of May 4th, right?
That's right. That's right.
So if I need to change that deadline now, or a student is asking if I can change that deadline, fine. And I always tell my students too, I'm more concerned about quality of work
Mm-hmm.
and their learning and their professional development, right, than I am about this, again, somewhat arbitrary deadline, aside from the fact that I say we do have this hard and fast deadline with the registrar.
Yep.
But between now and then, it's whatever works for us. So yeah, I really try to be I've always tried to be really flexible.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm really pushing that to students, saying, look, whatever you need, we'll get it done.
Mm-hmm.
I had one student who was going to what I call panic drop the course.
Mm-hmm.
She was
Oh, yeah.
so overwhelmed in the first couple days of switching to remote instruction and the changes that were happening in her life and in her work. She said, I almost panic dropped your class over the weekend because I just had too much to do. But I had sent an email to all my students saying, look, we'll get through the semester. If you have need, we'll talk about flexing assignments. She said, so I decided to stick with it. And now I always think about that idea, right? They're just, students are panic dropping.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Which is silly.
It is. It is. But the day I knew we were going, so the president announced on Wednesday. I met Thursday morning with my class. I collected their cell phone numbers and told them, I'm not letting you drop. I'll call you and talk you out of it.
Yeah.
There's no reason for you to drop my class.
Yeah.
The students appreciated it, and then they've all been good. But I agree with you. I think that's, and they do. They get really sort of uptight over these things. And so my class this semester is honor students. So I have high achieving, highly motivated students. And they're all doing great work, but they were nervous about it.
They put a lot of pressure on themselves too.
Too.
And sometimes I think also as instructors, we need to say to our students, it's okay that you can't do what you used to do. Be kind. I try to really tell my students, be kind to yourself as well.
Yeah.
And it is really unprecedented times.